Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. My name is Becca and this is my channel where I talk about all the houseplant things. And today we are talking about what actually makes the perfect houseplant environment. So there's a lot of different types of environments out there. Every individual home, every individual room within your home is going to have different conditions. It's super important to set your plants up for success so that they are giving you the least amount of stress possible. Least amount of stress, highest amount of reward. That's what we're going for. And there's a lot of things that you can think about in advance to set your plant up well so that they're not causing you stress and so that they are thriving. First, I want to talk about humidity. So there are a lot of different schools of thought in regards to humidity. I believe that it really just depends on the type of plant that you're trying to keep, because for some plants, they don't need an ambient humidity of anything higher than like 10%. You know, they're totally fine. Typical homes will sit between 30 and 60% humidity. I mean, when I was living in Arizona, it was oftentimes as low as like 10% humidity. And I did have a thriving plant collection at that time. I did set up certain zones in my home that I hoped were a little bit more humid, but generally we weren't working with very much. I've even seen some people say that plants that typically would require a lot of humidity, like Anthurium, can live in much lower humidity if you are doing things like making sure that they're like never drying out, making sure that they're just getting everything they need in other regards, and then the plant just sort of balances itself out with humidity. I personally don't have a lot of experience with doing that because every time I've ever tried to have an Anthurium in a lower humidity situation, it didn't go well for me. So I personally can't speak to that, but there are people out there in the plant community who have had success and have shared stories about how they had their Anthurium in low humidity and it was fine. So what I would consider low humidity is anything below 30%. And even then I'm hesitant to say anything even below 40%, but I'd say anything below 30% is definitely like very low humidity. And the reason that these houseplants need humidity is because they come from tropical regions. So where they are from is extremely humid, and so those are the conditions that the plant has been adapted to survive in. But when it comes to just general houseplant care, most houseplants will be happy at the 30 to 60% threshold. If you can get it up higher than that without causing issues in your home, that would be amazing. My greenhouse cabinet has been topping up at like 80% humidity most of the time, and some of the leaves that have come out from that cabinet lately have been so much bigger than ever before. And I really attribute that to the humidity, because that is really like the #1 change that I have made, is putting more plants in that greenhouse cabinet. And so more plants equals more moisture, which equals just higher ambient humidity. There are some things you can do to increase humidity, but honestly, a lot of these little fixes aren't going to make huge impactful changes. So what I think is best is if you know that a plant is going to need really high humidity or higher humidity than your home can withstand, then just don't get the plant, or get one of them and just be really diligent with watering, and maybe try out a small humidifier directly next to the plant, or even something like a pebble tray. That should help just a little bit. But generally, if a plant is not getting what it needs, no matter how much you try to amend the situation around them, they're just not going to be happy, and you're going to be dealing with things like crispy leaves or smaller growth and things like that. And that's just because the plant isn't in its optimal environment. That's not necessarily a deal breaker or a bad thing for a lot of people. They're happy to have the smaller growth, the occasional crispy leaf, but if that means a lot to you, maybe just don't get those humidity loving plants. The next most important factor to consider to have thriving houseplants is lighting. It really is a make or break for some plants. There are some plants that need a certain amount of hours of that direct or indirect light, and there's certain that just don't really care either way. So south windows tend to be the highest light situation. The sun is probably streaming through a south window all day. West windows, you're gonna get that evening sun, late afternoon and evening sun, which tends to be really warm. So if you have any plants that are super high light needs, I would suggest that south or west window. But also my personal favorite type of window is an east window, because you get that really bright, strong morning sun, without the heat, because usually mornings are cooler. And so when you have a plant in an east window, it's not going to heat up as much as it would in a west window. Not to say it's not going to get warm in an east window, but I just have found that burning and things like that is much less common in an east window. North windows are going to be the least effective as far as lighting goes, but that doesn't mean that they're useless. I would suggest putting darker foliage in those windows, or just plants that are known for not needing as much light. But of course, depending on where you live, where I live in Missouri, a north window is really not effective at all, but in Arizona, it's a great window. So really just depends on where you live and the intensity of that light. You can buy light meters that will tell you how many foot candles a specific window is giving or a specific area is giving. And then surely you can find some data online about, you know, the range of foot candles a certain plant needs if you want to get super technical with it. I don't have a light meter and I don't really do the foot candle thing, but I know several people that do, and they really enjoy having like a specific number. That's just helpful for you if you're just starting out and you don't really know how to feel out how a plant is doing lighting wise. If you want to put a plant in a specific spot, but the lighting is not great, and you're thinking to yourself, it's fine. It'll work itself out. I think that it'll be fine. I'm gonna say 90% of the time it's not gonna be fine. So I've learned this the hard way. Obviously, if I'm sharing it, it's a lesson that I have learned. But there's been so many times where I've said to myself, oh, this plant would look so good in this corner, and I'm just gonna see how it goes. We're just gonna see what happens. And yeah, again, most of the time it didn't go well, and I ended up having to move the plant. Or earlier in my collecting days, I didn't realize that I did that to the plant and like set it up for its ultimate doom. And I kind of wondered why the plant died. I was like, what the heck happened? And now that I've had, you know, more years under my belt, I now understand that lighting is super, super essential. If your plant isn't getting enough lighting, it'll take longer for the soil to dry out. And also the plant isn't able to photosynthesize effectively. The soil not drying out fast enough is going to cause things like root rot, fungus gnats. It's just not a good situation. So if your plant is getting an adequate amount of light, it will be using the water. Naturally, there might also be some evaporation just from the dryness in the air, or just the sun and the heat and all of that kind of stuff too. So it's really important that you are making sure that your plants are in good lighting situations, because it can also affect the roots. And speaking of soil, having a good and proper soil substrate is one of the most important things that I could tell you today. Like, if you don't hear anything else, actually, I want you to hear everything I'm saying, but having the right soil is so, so important. When I say that you need that good, proper soil, I'm telling you that you're probably gonna need to do something a little bit more than going and buying a bag of potting mix off the shelf at the hardware store and planting your plants in that. And the reason is these plants need lots of space in their roots to have air. If you're new to plants, that might sound like a strange concept that the plant roots would need air, but when the soil is too compact, when there aren't things mixed in the soil to create space, those roots are just going to drown. Oftentimes as well, those mixes that are super dense and don't have additives aren't going to dry out very fast, which again can lead to root rot. And that is the number one problem that I had when I was just using regular potting mix, was I was getting root rot all the time, and I was so puzzled as to why. But it was just because the soil was so dense that it was just crushing and suffocating those roots. If you've been following me for any amount of time, you know that I always use my own product that I made with a soil company based out of Tucson, Tanks Green Stuff. It's called De La Tanks. It's a pre-made houseplant mix, and it's sold online. It's sold in certain retailers. You can find them on their website. But I'm not saying that that is the only product you can get, but it is a good example of soil that you should be using. So within that soil, we have cocoa chips and we have pumice. And the reason that I chose pumice over perlite is because perlite tends to float to the top of the soil, and it just doesn't, it stops being effective if it's not actually within the soil. So the pumice stays within the soil because it's chunky and heavy enough. And then the other component of that soil is compost. So there's no peat in it at all, which is just environmentally a lot better. So whether you're buying the De La Tanks mix or you're mixing your own, or there's a shop near you who makes their soil mixture or whatever, just make sure that you're using a good quality soil, because it really is the gift that keeps on giving. and it's worth the investment. It really is. And if you're not willing to spend money on a pre-made mix, you can learn how to mix your own. You can come up with a ratio that works for you and just experiment with it. That's what I did for years before I linked up with Tank's Green Stuff and we made like an actual soil recipe. But before I was kind of just like grabbing handfuls of things and throwing it in the bin and seeing what happened. Again, most of the time it was fine, but I did experience root rot a lot. And I think it is just due to the materials I was using. They just weren't very high quality. So if you can find some high quality materials to mix yourself, totally suggest it, but that is going to be a major change for your collection if you do up your soil game and take that seriously. I have a lot of videos on my channel that I've done with Tank's Green Stuff, just talking about soil education for houseplants. And so I think it's super important, and it's something that I overlooked for years. And I saw such an improvement when I actually prioritized that. Like, I'm getting fired up thinking about it. It's actually crazy what like good quality soil will do for your houseplants. The last component for a healthy and good houseplant environment is space. So this is gonna be a hard pill to swallow for some people, myself included. If I ever have to move and leave this room, Lord be with me. But one of the most important things is having space for your plants. So I think that the reason that I dealt with pests as badly as I did in the beginning was because I just stuffed my apartment with plants and everything was touching, everything was overlapping. There was just a lot of plants in there. And I think maybe at the time I had like 70 to 100 plants. And so for me, it wasn't like a massive collection, but because my collection now is more like 120, 130, I would say. So it was much less than what I currently have, but the amount of space I had was so much less and everything was like touching. And the reason you don't want your plants to be touching is because pests are just having a party. They're jumping from leaf to leaf. They're spreading all of these things. And the number one pest that I deal with is spider mites. And I was dealing with it all the time in my old apartment where all of my plants were constantly overlapping. And ever since I moved here, I did bring the spider mites with me. Let's make that clear. But when I do have an outbreak, it's concentrated to like 1 or 2 plants. Like, it's really not that big of a deal. I'm not having to treat my entire collection. And that has made all the difference for me personally, like mentally, emotionally, all of these things. Because having a pest is like an emotional roller coaster because, well, number one, you feel guilty that you even let this happen. Number two, it's overwhelming because now you have to figure out what to do or else you're going to lose these things that you have emotionally invested in, you financially invested in, and you know, they just mean a lot to you. So there is a little bit of risk involved in having plants that you might lose them due to pests. And again, one of the best ways to cut down on the possibility of pest spread is to just spread your plants out and so that they're not touching each other. And this doesn't mean that you can't have a lot of plants, but it just means that you need to be strategic about how you're displaying them and where you're putting them. So I have plants that are very close to each other. Actually, I think some of these up here do touch each other, but for the most part, nothing is touching. They'll be kind of like this situation. Like, they look like they're overlapping and then you turn and they're not. So I love doing that. I love just like having them close, but just like shifting the pot around slightly so that they're not touching, but they could be like over each other, but not touching, no touchy. Also, this method of displaying your plants can also keep you in check to not buy a ton of plants, because the fact is, if you have too many plants and you're overwhelmed, you're not gonna take care of them and things are gonna die. And so an environment where a plant is going to be neglected and you're bringing it in knowing that it will probably be neglected, that's not a good environment, right? So you wouldn't do that to like a pet or something. I hope you wouldn't do that to a pet, but you know what I mean? It's a plant, so it's not as serious, but generally, like, why would we spend money on things that we know we aren't gonna be able to take care of long term? And maybe in our heads, we're like, no, this plant is new and exciting and I can take care of it. That plant will be fine, but what about the plant that's been sort of on the outs for a while? And you've been thinking, I don't really like that plant anymore, but I'm gonna keep it. See, the first plant that's gonna perish is that one when you bring in the new one, okay? So doing it this way, not having an overcrowded plant space, also allows you to keep your spending in check, keep your collecting in check, because if you literally do not have space for the plant in a spot that has good lighting, has good humidity for your plant, if you don't have the space, then you just don't have the space and you can't get the plant. Or you need to get rid of something humanely. Now, we know that I'm not above just throwing away a plant if you're over it. Like if you can't mentally go through the process of selling it. I try really hard not to do that, but sometimes it is just necessary. And sometimes I get comments from people that are like upset that I would even suggest that to people to just throw away a plant. I don't know if those people fully understand like what goes through your head mentally when you are having like a depressive episode or you're having a moment where you're extremely overwhelmed. Maybe they haven't experienced that before, but for me, sometimes I have had to throw a plant away just because I was like, I can't handle this. It's in such bad shape that if I tried to sell it or give it to someone, I would feel more guilty and it would take more brain space than I want, you know? So anyway, thank you so much for watching this video, and I hope that it was helpful in just explaining like the basics of what is most important. Take your time curating a collection, because if you take your time, you will be able to consider all of these things so much better than if you go out and you buy like 5 plants every single weekend. You're gonna have a big collection really fast, and it's gonna be really expensive and a lot harder to keep them happy and have spaces for them. If you have anything that you'd like to add, I'd love to hear it in the comments down below. And if you're new here, if you're new to houseplants, or if you've just never seen me before, I would love for you to subscribe to my channel. If you've been around for a while, hey, thank you so much for being here and watching this video. I do have a vlog channel where I share more personal and life type of things if you're interested in seeing more from me. But in general, I've got a lot of really awesome videos on this channel, and I would love for you to take a look if you haven't already. So thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.